Today, we interview Chris Howard, the founder of Ethos Recovery, and Roy DePerez, founder of Back to Basics Outdoor Adventures, about the world of substance abuse and recovery. We talk about a modern world lacking in role models and secure family structures, how drugs and drug culture have become a dark rite of passage for our young men. Chris and I also debate the underlying reasons people use drugs and alcohol in the first place, and is it even worth kicking up all that sand? Even more importantly, Chris and Roy talk in depth about the various strategies used to get reluctant persons into treatment. And of course, what podcast on addiction and mental health would be complete without a conversation on the perks of ice baths and tattoos? My name is Benjamin Russick, licensed marriage and family therapist, and this is my podcast, Look, Just Tell Me What to Do. So we're going to start with Chris. Talk about yourself.
I'm Chris Howard. I'm a substance abuse counselor. I do interventions from time to time. I'm a certified case manager, interventionist. I have a long-term recovery house in Los Angeles, really centered around helping young adult males make the transition into adulthood, really. A lot of them have never really had to adopt responsibility over their life, and a real essence of what the program is really centered around is helping them adopt personal and social responsibility as a means of ameliorating some of the issues centered around, mental health and substance abuse, like really helping them define and develop a purpose in their life.
And that, folks, is why Chris Howard has 10,000 followers on TikTok.
I think it's almost 15 now.
15 now?
But honestly, I'll tell you the one thing it's taught me is resilience.
Yeah.
Yeah, this last week, there was a video we had about, I was talking to a guy in the recovery house about sleeping in AA meetings. Honestly, it was funny because how on TikTok things get interpreted. I was like, hey, dude, you probably shouldn't be sleeping in meetings. If you're tired, go throw some water on your face. It's just not a good look. It's a little disrespectful.
Yeah.
And dude, they went after me hard. A little emotionally taxing for sure.
Roy, who are you and what do you do? And please, you're too far from the mic already. You can bring it in.
I told you it's going to be closer, dude. I told you.
My name is Roy DuPerez, and I have a hard time following directions, apparently. Yeah, I'm originally from Venice Beach, California, and I grew up there in the 70s and 80s and got the opportunity to go to college in Flagstaff, Arizona. And that's where I currently reside, raising my family and maintaining my business. And we're in the same field with Chris. I run a program called Back to Basics Outdoor Adventures. We work primarily with young adult men, 18 to 35, struggling with substance abuse, alcoholism. They're with us for about a year, going through different facets of the program. We have a hybrid model where half the week they're in the field. And what we refer to that is there's these weekly expeditions to places like Moab, Zion, Grand Canyon, Sedona. Those guys participate on the other half of the week in more of a clinical schedule, seeing their individual therapist, group therapy. We have a culinary program.
Really?
Yeah.
They learn to cook?
Yeah. So, life skills has been a big push for me as far as, we're in treatment, but now what, and how am I going to apply what I've used in treatment towards becoming an adult?
So you teach them to cook out in the woods?
No, because they're housed in town, and we're in Flagstaff proper, and they're housed in town. That's where they would be cooking for the culinary class, but they do cook in the outdoors.
All right. Wow. That's amazing. I worked in high-end treatment for a long time, and with all due respect to all the fantastic staff that work in those places, I think it's an enormous racket, because what you need to get better, and Chris is nodding his head, is connection and community and accountability and structure and faith in the process. You don't need, for the Four Seasons. Mm-hmm. And it's just extraordinary to me how much money people spend because they think that they just throw money at the problem. But what they need is an SLE. Right? They need...
Because the business model is centered around amenities. They figured really good marketing strategies, and it makes sense because it's what makes people comfortable. Mm-hmm. And often, in line with, we were talking a little bit about jujitsu before, is discomfort actually promotes growth, though.
Yeah, it does.
And in a lot of these places, they're a little too comfortable, and then people leave and they relapse. People are like, well, why'd they relapse? And it's interesting. So I went down a little wormhole on the evidence-based research, because everyone's like, well, we want evidence-based research. I found a study, it was actually the last 3 years of high rates of relapse for people who've been in luxury-based treatment. Not to say that you need to be in some state-run roach motel shitty facility. I'm not saying that at all. You need a place that nurtures love, compassion, community, nice, decent accommodations. But
absolutely,
you don't need to be in massage and yin yoga yoga every day.
100%.
And I'm a yoga guy.
You're a yoga guy?
I'm very much a yoga guy. I'm a yoga guy big time.
Roy, are you a yoga guy? You don't
I only do those kind of things in emergencies where
it does yoga in an emergency.
Yeah, I mean, Ben, I heard you earlier. You asked Chris, "Are you into somebody? Are you somebody who doesn't like taking care of themselves or healing themselves?" And that struck a chord with me. Is that I've got like probably 6 out of 10 fingers working, and I just got out of like 2 back-to-back surgeries. And
what happened to you?
Well, I trained too, and
you trained jiu-jitsu?
Yeah, and I tore my meniscus.
Because those sound like jiu-jitsu injuries. With your fingers.
and I tore my meniscus, and I've got a swollen shoulder now, and a torn rotator cuff on the other side.
Jesus, you trained the wrong way.
And it's not even all jits. It's just a combination of lifestyle and things that like
how long did you train for?
It's been about 6 years.
Okay,
and I feel like it's just been part of this like chapter 2 of my life. Mm-hmm. I'm late in the game, for sure, but I really do have a satisfaction from training, and it does force me to be uncomfortable and recognize like my mortality. I train with guys that are 20 years younger than me. That they're faster, stronger.
How old are you?
47, almost 48.
So one thing, growth. So what I tell people is that addiction's not cured; it's outgrown. You're not going to cure you. The only thing you can do, and this is a Jungian idea, actually, Carl Jung is sort of my guy, is grow. That's the only thing there is greater consciousness growth. It's all kind of the same thing. You're both nodding because it's fucking true. In jiu-jitsu, you know how there's like certain moves you avoid? Like I don't shoot triangles because we're stocky guys. Like it's kind of hard for us.
Sure.
Right. But I don't shoot triangles, because I'm not, it's an ego thing because it's like if I shoot a triangle and it doesn't work, the guy will pass my guard. He'll bust it open. Being a black belt is the kind of the dark lining of that is that everyone's trying to kill you. So if you try something new, right, it won't work. They'll put everything they have into like, oh, I passed black belt's guard today. I'm awesome. I'm the best. So I got to deal with that ego shit. And then like maybe my core, and it's a flexibility issue. So if I start shooting triangles, there'll be many things that I don't like doing, all wrapped up into one move. So I'll grow, but it will be shitty. But the only way to improve in jiu-jitsu, the only way is to do shit you really, really don't want to do. And lately I've been training trying to like can my ego and just like, all right, I'm going to get beat. That's fine. I'm going to try this new move. And on Monday I went in and I did that and I fucking smoked everybody. I'm like, it was totally different me. It was great. So I'm on a high.
And I think that there's a lot of parallels with that for me personally, as far as like, I don't want to try new things and suck, and I don't want to take the risk and not, maintain the ego. Right. And so we've been talking about that during this trip, as far as like, I'm really reluctant to reach out. Like I'm not a heavy marketer, even though I'm the face of the company and the owner and the founder, and I have, all the experience and information to share. I don't like taking those kind of risks of, I don't want to call somebody and then them not call me back. And it's a parallel with, me being an older guy starting in jiu-jitsu, is that like, there are some risks I need to take. There are some things I need to do to better prepare myself, but it's an ego blow for sure.
It's a massive frame shift. So in recovery, I'm going to bring this back to recovery. Chris, can you talk a little bit about the frame shift that people have to deal with when they get sober?
In terms of frame shift, what specific aspects are you talking about? Because it's a nuanced.
Okay, socially, many dimensions. Socially, there's a frame shift. They have to hang out with. They have to sometimes find new friends. They have to sometimes change careers. They have to change their attitudes about entitlement. So the idea of surrender is like in humility is super important. That you're not in control. Those are frame shifts. I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on.
Yeah, I think I'll probably tie it in a little bit just into recovery housing and then people who are just getting sober in general. I think the frame shift also is like, it's interesting because it ties into what we were just talking about is really risk-taking behavior and how much risk-taking behavior, the association we talk about it amongst like either professionals or even like globally is really like from a societal perspective is like very much it's associated with a negative thing, and risk-taking behavior is actually involved in every aspect of our life. Like actually showing up here today was a risk. I had to take social risk for coming into your house doing this podcast. That how am I going to be perceived? Am I going to come off in some weird way?
Finding a parking spot in San Francisco.
That's the biggest risk. Yes.
Yeah, taking your bags. Take your bags into the house so that nobody's when they smash up your car, you won't lose everything.
Totally. So there's all these risks that we don't even equate as risks. Mm-hmm. And for people who are getting sober, let alone like moving into sober living, but just going into, let's say, a support group, whether it's 12-step or, whatever support group you choose to go to, refuge, you have to start with taking risks. Like your frame shift almost on some level has to be like a different form of risk-taking behavior. And often you're so numb from being shielded by whatever substances you've been taking for however many years. No one wants to embrace pain. Like this idea, like the Goggins mentality, so to say. David Goggins. So he's done like Navy SEALs, Green Beret. His whole thing is really embrace the suck. He runs like 200 miles.
Is he the guy that says like when you're at capacity, you're only 40%? Like when you think you're completely out of energy, you're actually only...
You're opening the door.
Yeah.
You just opened a new door. And he talks about like this idea and back to where we started a little bit about like luxury-based treatment. It's like, how do we make you comfortable? In reality, comfort has really made us a little bit more sick in a lot of respects. Comfort was really me being on drugs and being able to socially withdraw. I think about like a lot of the marketing commercials I see of people who are like getting sober. It's like someone walking along the beach, like, oh, you're getting so. This is what recovery looks like, and it should really be like fucking miserable. I have like social anxiety. This isn't actually a very fun experience if I'm totally transparent about it. The real steps in the recovery aren't really nice. They're extremely socially awkward a lot of times.
Making amends,
physically uncomfortable because post-acute withdrawal syndromes.
They last up to 2 years.
And then exposure to new social dynamics. Listen, I don't even roll jujitsu a lot. I rolled a very short period of time, and it's often working with guys. I'm like you don't want to do AA? Maybe you should just go like try to roll jujitsu or go do something in some social dynamic, whether or not you want to be sober or not, in a 12-step program. Figure out somewhere where you can solidify yourself in community. And like jujitsu, you're working towards growth and development, and it's nurturing discipline, accountability, responsibility. If you don't show up and you're dialed into that group, guys are like, where you been? And it has some of those same tenets as a 12-step fellowship.
Well, folks get so, when you're on drugs and drinking, you get so insular in your little world. Roy, you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I kind of have a different experience or thought on that. When I got sober when I was 25, I was so done, and I had been avoiding AA since I was a kid. My parents have been sober forever, and they had me in treatment when I was in junior high. I was talking with my mom a couple days ago. I have a son that's in 6th grade. He's almost 12 years old. He's had a couple of incidents at school, minor, but I'm so sensitive to, is he going on that trajectory, right? Is he going down that path? And my mom has had to pull me to the side and, like, son, compared to you, this guy's like an angel. He's got a lot of room in comparison. Anyhow, but being in AA, being in 12-step program and being sober myself, it's been 22 years. And I can remember the beginning being so enthused because I was experiencing immediate awareness and clarity, and that I was hearing things and people were speaking my language. Even though I'd been exposed to that demographic and that dialogue for years, it was just in a different place to hear it. And I'm a skeptic.
Tell me about the moment. Like, what was your drug of choice?
I'm an alcoholic. Yeah, I've smoked crack. I've tried acid. I've done all these things, during that high school and early college years.
And so you were 25 years old, and what did your life look like?
I had just finished my undergrad. I was starting a company with 2 other friends, and we were in more of the social work, working with adolescents in kind of an academia social work capacity, and I became the liability to that company.
How so? If I may ask.
Of course. Ask away.
This is the great thing about working in recovery, is that people will tell you the most gnarly details about themselves.
It's a good story.
And, I'm an open book if you ask, but I won't necessarily just spill. So please ask, and I'll definitely
asking.
disclose.
I will ask.
And so what was going on is that like I was at that crossroads in my life where I'd kind of built myself into an adult position, but the maturity and just awareness was not there. And fortunately, a series of events had happened during that summer. I tore my ACL on a boat trip. I crashed the trailer. I left my brother on the beach, passed out. It was just a series of events. I'd ended up in Mexico for a work trip, and I had sworn it off. I wasn't going to drink. I was done drinking after Powell.
So all those injuries came from you were drunk and like you fell off a building or something? Like
I was wakeboarding at the time, and I landed what's called landing in the flats, and it just the impact on my knee.
And you were drunk while you were wakeboarding?
I was drinking a little bit. Yes, I feel like
you had the bottle. He's out there on the wakeboard with the bottle in his hand, like
so. I'll tell
bouncing up and down.
I thought I was so cute that I used to put my Budweiser can in my vest, and I would have a cigarette still lit in the water, holding the rope, pop up, and do my thing.
I bet you were cute.
There was that bravado and that
ego,
total ego.
Uh-huh.
So anyhow, and
That's
then I was in Mexico
image.
at some mezcal.
I didn't see it though. Just got to keep the cigarette going. As
long
as
it was
that you're real cool.
And then the flick when you were done, as I'm like jumping the wake, just like such fucking young guy bravado. So that describes kind of my state of.
It's so true. People think they're so awesome when they flick a cigarette. What is it about that? Like, I'm amazing. Watch me.
Yeah, so I'm in Mexico. I swore I wasn't going to drink, and I was, going to be in this professional circumstance. Part of the tour that we were on, seeing these pyramids outside of Mexico City, there was a mezcal warehouse developing all the mezcal there, different flavors. And I had this great idea or a justification that I'd never tried this flavor. And this is like a cultural experience.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I'm Mexican. I'm Mexican, dude. There's no cultural experience that I haven't had around mezcal.
Uh-huh.
And
you were expanding your horizons.
Yes. Developing. And so 3 days later, after just this little cup of raspberry flavored whatever, or banana flavored whatever, and that's
banana mezcal. That sounds good.
It was terrible.
That sounds terrible. I want to drink.
Original flavor here.
I'm gonna
need a smoked agave. Anyhow, I totally compromised myself. I compromised my group. I was tore up, and that incomprehensible demoralization, really kicked in, and I was fortunate to get out of the country without any legal repercussions.
What did you do? Try to burn down one of their pyramids?
I don't really remember, but there was some.
That's the real answer.
That's how he knows.
Yeah, and I do have glimpses of where we were at, and they were not. But there was a lot of wreckage that night and the night after, and so it just put me in a position of like I had this opportunity to develop as a professional, and I'm totally compromising myself and others. Mm-hmm. And although that wasn't the worst thing I'd ever done during my drinking career, it was that event that really rang the bell for me that I need to maybe reach out.
It's interesting, isn't it? Yeah. What do you make of that, Chris? That there's events that like you have a bunch of wreckage, you've had like a bunch of DUIs, you've been in jail, and it's usually like this one little thing that happened. What is that?
With drug addicts and alcoholics, it's so interesting because you start hearing, and if you really went down through like every single story that they went through, you're like, well, at the end of it, you're like, no, that makes sense why that would, but then you hear everything else that transpired before that, and you're like, well, why was it this time? And I think you just burn out and get tired of like the same one.
I just wonder what that burnout thing is. It's like behaviors have attitudes have an expiration date, and it's a mystery to me when the expiration date comes calling.
For me, fear is a great motivator. I mean, I didn't come to 12-step because I was on this virtuous path.
Yeah,
right?
Fuck that.
I mean, I was up against the wall. All the girlfriends were gone. All the like outside external stuff was just being stripped away. And I think that unfortunately for me is like, I'm out of a job. I don't know what my future can look like. I clearly like don't have a reset button here. Yeah. Other than to reach out. And I want to share this story is that for years, my parents were sending me 3rd edition big books with these little passages of like, hey, honey, you might want to check this out sometime. And so I had at the time like 5 3rd editions, next to all my books from college and all this, but I never cracked them open. I would say they did their best as parents, but as alcoholics to kind of keep their distance and keep.
Oh, they were alcoholics?
Yeah. At that time, they were probably like 20 years sober.
And they were in recovery?
Yeah. They got sober in the early 80s, finally. And I say finally because I watched them in and out of the rooms for a while too.
Sure.
Yeah. So I reached out to the people I've been trying to avoid and project awesomeness to for so long. That was a facade because they knew I was in trouble. And I reached out for help and I was fucking broken. Yeah. And I think that's what the expiration date is too. It's like inside I was fucking broken. broken. And it wasn't somebody else's message that I got to do this.
For the world, and you can both answer this, and might be an impossible question. What does it feel like to feel broken inwardly?
What does it feel like to be broken inwardly? That's something that cannot, it's one of those things where there's so much to that can't even be articulated in words. Like I think about when like everything came to an end, it really wasn't even the end there. It's like my house got raided by the police, and it's because someone told on me, so there's betrayal and like all this shit, and like being handcuffed, crying, all this shit going on, and being like, I'm done. But then in a weird spot, like too, is like not even knowing why I'm done is what's weird about that. Like, is it because of that feeling?
The reason that I'm drilling down on this is a shift in consciousness are really fascinating to me. Mm-hmm. So you have the sense of I'm done, a sense of inner brokenness. There's been a frame shift, I feel like, of some kind. It's deep. And I hear this from everybody in recovery. There's that moment or that weekend or that month or that year when people that haven't quite got it yet, who are still in the throes of their addiction, they can't comprehend it because it's impossible to comprehend a shift in Jung said that you cannot see beyond the bounds of your own consciousness. By definition, you can't see more than you can see, right? Mm-hmm. Like I knew a girl who lost 10% of her vision when she hit her head, and she didn't know it till a neurologist said, hey, you've lost 10% of your vision. How is she supposed to know? If everything reduces by 10%, how would you know that?
Yeah, of course.
It's subtle enough, right?
Yeah, subtle enough to where you don't perceive it.
I haven't thought about that stuff in a while, and I haven't felt or revisited that feeling in a long time. I mean, I could cry, thinking about like that shift for me was so profound because I thought I knew everything, and I thought I had all these plans and I had all these ideas and I'm a smart guy, blah, blah, blah. And whatever the universe needed to do in that moment to give me that perspective, it worked because I started this journey and I was super committed to the process, and I bought into all the absolutes, and I think that it was important for me at that period of my life to have those parameters, that structure. And I was hungry for that guidance too. I still was hungry for that leadership and direction. And I think that my relationship with God, as I understand it, and it's written in pencil, has been that anchor for me. And I'm willing to continue to pursue it. And I know that if I'm got a clear mind, I've got a better chance.
What do you make of all the beauty that you've produced in the world out of the wreckage of your past? That is the more enormous amount of good and growth that you've brought to the planet.
Yeah, I mean, dude, I just think of my son right now. So it's heavy because it was this Sunday, and we've had a hell of a winter as far as snow. There's a resort in my town, and my son and I snowboard, and he's been on it since he's 4, and he's doing really well. And we go into these sections called the trees. You got to be really good to be in that terrain. And I was having a hard time staying up and caught up with him, and I got to see his progression with something I've been doing all my life, and I get to share that with him. So I haven't cried a lot lately. I've been so guarded and calloused, just over the, whatever period of time. I went through a divorce starting about 7 years ago. And I think that it hasn't been until recently that I'm really embracing like how beauty can be interpreted, and how I can compartmentalize it or how I can minimize it, and not even acknowledge or realize what's in front of me, you know, and here it is. This DNA of mine is right in front of me doing awesome.
What was he doing?
It's just that he was able to, go through those trees and go through those obstacles that are difficult, and I mentored him through that, you know, and
look what you made.
It's a special relationship that we have with that activity, and it'll continue to grow.
Can I give you my impression of you? So I sometimes see some people as like, who are all heart. It's like their heart has expanded into their limbs, and it's like there's like a heart. There's like this heart that's the Roy-shaped heart in front of me. Like you're all heart, and it's really, I can see why you run a wilderness program, and I can see why you're doing what you're doing. It makes a lot of sense. Like you have so much to give. It's palpable how much you have to give.
And I think that it hasn't been until recently. And we talked earlier, last Thanksgiving, I had this like kind of epiphany or awareness that I've been spending so much time defending that heart and putting all these calluses and layers, and I need to let all that go. It's all false bravado, and I'm not able to
cigarette flick.
Yeah, it's that cigarette flick, right?
It's a cigarette flick.
But I haven't intentionally been holding on to that. It's just that like it had been my normal after 40 years, I don't want to be that guy. I want to be who I am.
Yeah, you're just beginning to step into your power.
Yeah.
Listen, I'm gonna stop picking on you for a minute, and I'm gonna pick on your buddy.
Yeah,
Thank you so much. That was really helpful. So, Chris, what was going on in your life? How old were you? And what was your drug of choice? It sounds like you were into narcotics. Is that correct?
I was very much into narcotics. It started off with pills. I had a mom who had like disc disease, but my mom was also schizoaffective. So,
oh really?
Yeah,
that's a rough one.
So we used to joke around and say we thought after a certain point, I thought our address was 5150.
That's really funny.
Which ironically ended up being a blessing and a real curse, because the police were at my house so frequently that when I would get busted, they would let me go.
Can I just pause and say what schizoaffective disorder is?
Please.
So schizoaffective disorder is a form of schizophrenia wherein you have a psychotic episode every time you have a mood shift. Like if you become depressed or anxious. It looks a little bit like bipolar because it kind of comes in waves, and it is devastating because they'll seem fine for a period of weeks or months, and all of a sudden something will happen, some event in their life that's upsetting, and crack. And suddenly they think people are talking about them. They'll be hearing things. They'll be seeing stuff, and it's really intense. Does that sound familiar?
Yes, and at the time they used to say my mom was bipolar paranoid schizophrenic.
Ooh.
That's what they used to. That was what it was coined at that time, and I grew up listening to that. While we're on this point, when my mom would flip manic, when she would go psychotic, she used to utter these things. She'd be like, Stanley Genzer, Heather Finn, Rampart Division, Hollenbeck Division. It turns out Stanley Genzer was the judge who took away custody of me from her and gave me to my grandmother. Heather Finn was the social worker who wrote the order. So it's like all these traumas, essentially.
Oh, interesting.
That had happened to her. She was picked up from Hollenbeck Division by my grandmother after she was sexually assaulted. The irony of all of this is my grandmother always had like followed my mom everywhere she lived, and like my mom would stabilize, and then as soon as my grandmother came back around, she would end up de-escalating. It would become like a pretty dramatic shift. And then interestingly enough, after my grandmother died, my mom stopped having episodes.
Oh, interesting.
Fucking weirdest case study ever. I was like, I try to talk to like psychiatrists and therapists about this.
Did they shift her meds or something?
No. At one point she had an episode, but it was because she had a lithium-induced stroke because they weren't checking her blood levels.
Is she still on meds?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, 100%.
In my opinion, and I don't have any science to back this up, but my sense is that when people, that psychosis is basically the dream world on the outside. Like whatever you're holding in becomes, it's like the ego keeps everything under wraps, right? Which is good. And at night we dream and we go kind of crazy. But when people become psychotic, it's like whatever their darkest fears are, whatever they're repressing, not always, of course, but often is just out there, like
projected in the reality.
Yeah, it's frightening to watch. So anyway, keep going. So
yeah, no, my drug of choice was pills. I basically got into pills through my mom and then graduated to heroin. That was before fentanyl days.
How old were you?
So the first time I started really picking up pills, I was 16. And then I went through pills until I got sober until I was 23, 24. I would intermittently shoot heroin, but then I didn't want to have abscesses. So I'd shoot heroin for a short period of time. Then I'd go back to smoking it. Then I'd go back to pills. Like I played like this game of control. Like I'm controlling my heroin use so I don't blow up into a full-blown IV drug user. But
the irony of that is amazing, isn't it?
It's funny.
Like if I become a full-blown IV user, I'm not a full-blown IV user.
Yeah, and I think looking back on it now, so much of my IV drug use specifically was very cultural. Like I went into a state-run treatment center, and in the state-run treatment center, everyone was shooting heroin, and I was like, I'm gonna go shoot heroin when I leave here.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'm pretty transparent about it. It's nothing I'm proud of. I was a bit of a follower in that regard.
Is that like the cigarette flick thing? Like I'm gonna be cool?
Yeah, it was, and which I think is a huge thing in treatment for young adults. It's like you end up in there, you might have like a weed-induced psychosis problem. You go in, everyone's shooting dope, and you come out, and you're like, I'm not even that hardcore. And it became, I would watch like a lot of pissing contests for who was the biggest loser. I played part of that pissing contest, and I was like, the first place I shot dope was San Julian Park in downtown LA. But I went and sought out San Julian Park in downtown LA because now I get to tell the story of the first time I shot dope was in San Julian Park in downtown LA. It was really like counterculture shit. And to elaborate on that,
it's like Pill Hill in San Francisco.
Yes. Yes. To elaborate on it, part of that identity was really tied into all the men around me, everyone who I grew up around, they were all going to prison. Everyone who I looked up to, I felt for a long time that my rite of passage into manhood was a 5-year stretch in state prison.
Oh, wow.
Because everyone that I saw that I looked up to went into prison. And when they came out for
Who are these people?
60, 90 days. Guys who were like 3 to 5 years older than me, who sold me drugs when I was younger. And I formed this some level of a semblance of a family system because mine was so compartmentalized and fragmented and fucked up.
May I ask what was going on? That you were looking for all these role models at home? Like,
Well, I mean, my dad wasn't around.
Okay.
No, like, again, he had his own mental health issues and substance use problems. And my grandmother was raising me. There was no male figures in my environment, and the male figures that were around were 2 to 3 years older than me. They were drug dealers. We were all doing shady shit. I was doing home invasions when I was 15 years old, not because I was a hardcore kid, but because the hardcore kids who I rolled with, I wanted to be a part of. And if they told me to jump through a fucking window or kick someone's door in, I would have done it in complete fear. And 99% of the time I was engaging in criminal activity, I was petrified,
right.
But I wanted desperately to be a part of this criminal element, which
right.
was, if I'm really honest, I have friends to this day who are shitty human beings. They're not good people.
Really?
Yeah, 100%. I have a few people in my life that we're distant from each other, but I love them unconditionally. And because through a lot of shit that I went through, and despite how fucked up they've been to every other person in their life, it's never turned on me.
What's your definition of a bad person?
People who willfully inflict harm and injury on other humans for their own personal gain despite the consequences, and luckily I've never been in that spot with them because one, I pulled out of that game much quicker, and then I kind of became a source where I'm not going to be open to that because I'm not playing in that world. I don't know how I ended up going down that route.
You found a family, and when we find that it sticks, that's why I say that if you don't find community in sobriety, you're fucked, because you have to find a new healthy family or it's just not going to work for you.
Yeah, I think also there's this thing with specifically young adult males. I think there's some fucking fire in us that needs to be put out some way. There's an adrenaline thing. The man I work with, a lot of what we're trying to do is a lot of experiential stuff because I'm like 12-step on its own. I'm like, that's how I got recovery. Yeah. I'm like all about it. On its own wasn't going to work for me.
What kind of stuff do you do with them?
We go cliff jumping. We take these guys up.
Cool.
We found a pretty heavy spot up in Mammoth. We do cliff jumping. We do snowboarding. We take these guys to rock climbing gyms. Just different avenues to push themselves. Positive risk taking.
Push
behavior.
them off a cliff. Roy, do you notice that too? That adrenaline thing with young men?
Well, I kind of want to piggyback on that. We don't have a rite of passage necessarily in our culture.
Yeah, we sure.
And so what kind of inspired that comment is that like we're hungry for that, at least identification or blueprint, right?
Yeah.
And so in our culture, it's like, well, when I get to second base with this girl, I'm at this stage or tier.
It's basically sex and getting your driver's license are the only ones we got.
And, and drinking beers, those are like initial, I think, introductions into adulthood or what's perceived as adulthood. And that's from a very young age what I was pursuing. I watched all my older cousins who projected awesomeness with their boats and their hot girlfriends and boyfriends. And they had cocktails in their hand and somebody around their arm. And I mean, I'm so young. So what do I know? But that's what I saw, and that's what I perceived as success. So when my association with alcohol and it being part of my life, that wasn't ever the outcome. I always had consequences from the very beginning, yet I still was hungry for that blueprint of what life could look like. And so it wasn't until I got sober that just comparing different cultures that have that identity and have that passage of information and recognition by their peers or by their families, we don't have that.
It's like there's so much energy in young people that they go 100 miles an hour into a brick wall if they think it'll help them, and they can go into any direction. They need guidance, and we don't have that.
And I think for the most part, at least in the environments I've been around, there wasn't any kind of plan. How do you identify an outlet for this?
Yeah, what happened to our culture, Chris? Like what the fuck? It's not even the materialism piece that bothers me. It's the fact that we don't raise our youth.
Yeah. Have you heard of Coddling of the American Mind? Jonathan Haidt just basically goes back to like back in the days. Your generation, you're a little older than me, but even I was the last generation, born 85, where we played on the streets until the lights came on at home.
Right.
And that shit doesn't exist anymore.
No.
But how he ties in, he's a social psychologist, how he ties in is pretty eloquent. And he illustrates, like, we're seeing like these rates now of preteens and teens who have all this depression, anxiety, stuff like that. He talks a lot about how essentially like that time when you're out spending alone with your peers, you're figuring out how to navigate the world. You're fine tuning evolutionary processes essentially within yourself on how you're going to deal with interpersonal conflict, getting in trouble out on the streets. And then even the aspects of deception are actually kind of important too. Like, how do I get in trouble and this doesn't get back to my parents? Like, it takes higher cognitive effort. It's weird because I can have this conversation amongst us, but I wouldn't have that conversation around young people about like, the value of deceit.
Yeah.
And although there is some value in terms of higher level functioning because you're able to go, okay, in the future, this is going to kind of create more problems for me at home, you know?
So anyway, let's go back to your story. When you switched to IV, what was your...
Oh yeah, I go into IV drugs and then I was bouncing back and forth. I had a friend of mine die. That was really probably I think I don't cry much now, 4 or 5 times. I wish I could. I honestly wish there's times where I feel like I don't have the emotional capacity to let out. Or I think sometimes
you live in your head more than Roy does, I would say. Is that fair to say, Roy?
You're spot on.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
I'm the same way. I lift my head. I'm like, I don't fucking cry.
Well, and if I'm really honest, there's a part of me that I think cognitive behavioral therapy left a huge imprint on me in terms of when I was studying, and specifically emotional reasoning. Emotional reasoning is essentially like when we believe our emotional world is an accurate depictor of what's happening in reality.
But so in other words, when somebody has a feeling, that dictates the hierarchies of what's important. So if the person is, let's say somebody falls in love with somebody, and suddenly the fact that they're in love with that person dictates what's important. Like, that's more important than their job. It's more important than their family. It's that is the thing, because that's how they feel in that moment. And then when they have a different feeling, the hierarchies switch again, and it's fucking chaos.
Yes.
And that's why the thinking function is so valuable.
Yes. And for me, I think the imprint that left on me, also probably coupled with watching how emotions played out with my mother and seeing that's what my association was. I think for me, I rationalize. I am very much more analytical about processes. Like the feelings we have, that's normal because XYZ. I break it down. I'm like almost a robot.
Did drugs help you feel your feelings? What did drugs do for you? What was heroin doing for you?
So I have a weird perspective around like the whole drugs thing. I think for me, drugs, I enjoyed the effect produced by drugs and alcohol. I don't think there's a magical. I have all the trauma.
Well, I get that, but what was the effect? Euphoria.
A warm. You know what it is? I can articulate this one in speech. I view it like when I see a child wrapped up in those, what are those things called where they wrap them in the blanket when they're really
swaddled?
A swaddle. I remember like outside right now, you go out, it's a little cold out there.
Yeah.
You eat a little oxy, smoke a little heroin.
Yeah.
You go outside, you're rolling around with the swaddle on. Is what it feels like.
So let me, I'm going to challenge you a little bit.
Yeah, I'm ready.
I'm ready. So I did see one of your TikToks about that, about how you felt it was just the effects. So my position is that the addict feels more than your average person. Now, I can't prove that, but let's say you have been in a cold weather climate your whole life and you don't even know it. You're just so used to the cold, you don't even know it. And somebody walks up with a swaddle or a warm sweater and gives it to you like it's warm. The delta between how you're walking around feeling and the holy shit, this feels good, is going to be greater than your average Joe. So what I contend is that if you felt comforted, that your walking around state unconsciously was one of extreme discomfort, that you didn't even know how uncomfortable you were feeling.
And I would actually agree with that. Here's my thing about digging up all that, though.
Okay.
I have a philosophy that sometimes therapeutically we're digging up things that we've evolved certain mechanisms for. Because I have all the trauma. I have all the discomfort. I have all that stuff. Back to story, like what story are you holding on to? I'm a narrative-based guy too.
Me too.
So I go, what story am I holding on to? And unconsciously, I wouldn't actually refute that. Because I remember at one point, this is probably one of the most traumatic things I can think of in my life. I got sent to this foster home. It was the second time I got sent to a foster home. And my grandma was really into, you remember, did you ever hear of Trinity Broadcasting Network? The televangelists? Yes. The people on...
I used to watch those people.
Okay, so my grandmother was a born-again Christian.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And she was the one who took care of me, though, right? I couldn't stand any of that shit, but I grew up in it. That's like what I know. And she'd always pray, and she put her hands on the TV, on Benny Hinn and shit. No, she was the real deal, bro.
Wow.
It was a totally different thing. She put her hands on the TV and start praying, and she'd say, she starts speaking in tongues. That's exactly what she used to do. That was the one she used to do.
Sikity what?
She used to do all that shit.
I'm gonna remember that.
I ended up in this foster home. And I remember I can still visualize and put myself in there looking. I was sitting on the bunk bed. There was a TV on top of the dresser in that room. I remember turning on, I was like 9 or 10 years old. You couldn't have paid me to turn on the Trinity Broadcasting. But at that time, I felt so alone. I remember crying on top of this bed with my hands up in the air, like trying to connect to my grandmother. I'm please get me the fuck out of here. What's funny is I ended up getting out of there in like 48 hours. Funny thing, it didn't change me religiously at all, but
I'd like to piggyback on that. Years before I got sober, I was living in Mexico, and there's these beautiful 500-year-old cathedrals, and I can remember feeling some sort of solace there. I'm Catholic by family background, but I didn't grow up in the church. But I felt like I was so hungry for connection that I found myself staying in those pews for a longer period of time than just the tourist experience. Like those were my initial pulls or being gravitated towards the higher power discovery.
Well, that was healing for you, but for him it was traumatic, I think, is the difference.
But I think that you're hungry for, I interpret it as you were hungry for just connection to something
that point.
At that moment.
Okay.
No, in that moment it was me like figuring out how my rescue from the current traumatic incident was connecting to this thing that connected me really to my grandmother.
I see.
The truth of the matter is like I began to resent God very much so, because we grew up poor. We had cockroaches. My grandmother prayed to win the lottery. And I remember at one point my aunt was like, Chris, your grandmother doesn't understand that God doesn't do manual labor. You still have to do work. So I didn't become religious out of it. I did have a positive, negative thing.
So I think your original contention was that we can't hold on to our narratives like that sometimes things are better left alone. Is that basically what your position is? That like you don't always need to get into all this shit?
Yeah, I think sometimes digging up, we're going farther.
Kicks the hornet's nest.
Yeah, it kicks the hornet's nest. It's also speculation.
It is indeed.
It's all speculation. It's all 100%
at the end of the
subjective.
Day.
Yeah. So for me, whatever narrative I choose to create becomes truth.
I hear that. I think narratives though are formulated from the kind of the boulders of our psyche, the foundational stuff. And I think that even the narratives that you choose are based on precepts from you. You're going to pick certain types of narratives because of who you are. And I hear what you're saying. And I think it's true that there's a whole thing in narrative therapy where you rewrite your story.
100%.
But you have to rewrite your story based on stuff that is at least related to your experience, wouldn't you say?
100%. And I love that no one ever pushes back with me. So I like actually enjoy it when it does happen.
I'll come at you.
No, I love it. No, I love it. No, it's honestly like a liberating experience to be challenged more. Yes, because all of the things that we're constructing our narrative are often based on real life experience. The thing I'm saying is that experience can be interpreted in 19 different ways. But it's easy for me to shape a narrative based on my upbringing that the world's a cruel place. People don't stick around. We're kind of fucked. That could have been my schema. What ended up happening, this is the narrative I have. I remember at a point, it was a custody hearing. coming out of the first group home I had been placed in Pasadena. And I remember being in the custody hearing and feeling like, oh, these people aren't here. They're not going to show up for me. It became self-reliance at that moment, but it became a catalyst for growth and a lot of other maladaptive behavior as well, too. In all actuality, I feel like it was a shield that helped me grow, and that's based on that experience. That narrative could have shifted multiple different times in a negative direction. I also think that the reason why it's positive is because when I went into a group home, I was surrounded by other kids who were from broken homes.
What was the new narrative?
The narrative was like, you can't rely on other people. You need to figure out essentially how to rely on yourself for whatever emotional, psychological needs that you need.
And so here's where I would challenge that frame, which is, I think that's a good narrative to have. But a lot of folks who don't come from adversity and weren't in a place where they were being, brutally fucked over by the system and by life would have arrived at the idea of self-reliance. They kind of drift through life they're basically functional. But you have a passion for that narrative, that you've got to knuckle under and do this thing.
Yep.
That narrative would not have been created had you not had the other negative one.
100%.
And that's my entire point.
100%.
Yeah.
You and I, like, trauma promotes growth.
It has to.
On some level. Yeah.
Well, that's the gift of addiction. You either change or you're dead.
It totally is.
I have just a question for that comment about trauma. I mean, I think that, maybe guys like us or people like us have responded and taken that and made lemonade, right? But are there case scenarios where it just was too overwhelming for certain people's, circumstances? Not even that the trauma was so overwhelming, but them as individuals weren't able to overcome in some capacity.
Well, I don't know. That's a great mystery, because when I work in treatment, I meet people with extraordinary stories. I imagine both of you have probably had brushes with death, and you've met a lot of people who died, right? Yeah. The thing is, you're meeting the people who didn't die. So whatever salvation they had in their soul, whatever narrative they had going, whatever grasp on reality or whatever mental faculty that was helping them was the thing that kept them from dying. So it filters for the most amazing people. Not to say that people who die aren't amazing.
Sure.
But the people who couldn't cope, the ones that,
sample bias is what you're talking about.
Yes, thank you.
100%.
Thank you for that.
Can you define sample bias?
Well, it's the sample you have to measure. We don't have a representative sample of the population. We only have the people who survive. That's just by default.
Or the ones who are in recovery. In other words, and there's this huge swath of the population that are addicted to drugs and alcohol and sex and gambling and everything, who are barely functional and have no idea that they're addicts because they're so deep in it, and the people around them are addicts and no one knows. I think people in recovery are just the most amazing population, I think, in the world. I really do. Like, per capita, it's just extraordinary. It changed my life. My substance, if I had one, would be food. I've been pretty serious.
We talked about this.
We did? Yeah, over the phone?
We talked over the phone.
Yeah, pretty serious binge eating issues. So I understand craving and I understand the rationalization shit, but I'm not gonna have a brush with death. But man, working in recovery was such an eye-opener.
That might be a rationalization right there. You might actually, the binge eating gets out of control. You could have actually a more substantial brush with death because
later
the long-term health costs.
Yeah, I guess. Well, let's see. I'm in pretty good shape now.
Jiu-jitsu will push all that shit out.
Yeah, you can't be a fat ass and do. I know. I did see a video of a black belt who was like 300 pounds.
But big 300?
No, he was big. He was
tall?
He was fat. No, he was big. He was
fat.
Round like a ball.
You're using the derogatory term.
The fat phobic term. Motherfucker was fat, okay? What do you want me to say? He was 300 pounds, and he was big, and he was a black belt, and he was smooshing his opponents.
Yeah, totally.
He had the smush pass and the smush sweep. Anyway, Roy, you were going to say something?
I think I forgot.
Roy, what did alcohol do for you?
I was seeking something. I was seeking access to what I perceived as successful or happy, joy, navigation of life. And my parents were using pretty heavy when I was in my first 10 years of life. So I think that I was looking for something outside of what was going on in my home. And I perceived that alcohol was providing that for the people I looked up to. I coincidentally have a response to alcohol where it does like change my physicality and perception of things and does have a soothing effect for me. I can remember prior to drinking, and I was a chunk, speaking of fat asses, I was a chunkier boy. Why I bring that up is that my stature wasn't small and frail. And so if somebody approached me to fight, it wasn't about that I was afraid of the altercation. I was avoiding the emotional surge, the discomfort.
Were you anxious kid?
I wasn't an anxious kid. I'm just sharing that I wanted to avoid conflict. There was conflict at home. I didn't want more conflict in other areas of my life, right? So, but once I had booze in my system and I got into my first altercation and all the punches were connecting and everything worked out and I was getting all the high fives and, embracing.
Fascinating.
It was that switch for me.
So not only were you drinking to be an adult like the people that you admired, but it also enabled you to function like an adult in a sense.
In a sense that I could show up without hesitation.
Very much an initiatory substance for you.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Chris, was there an initiatory sense? I mean, you said you wanted to be with the cool kids kind of in the park and shoot heroin and stuff. Was that an initiation thing for you, do you think?
Yeah, I think the rite of passage thing was a huge element for me, but the rite of passage was also home invasions.
You too?
Yeah, I mean, that was just part of the deal. I wasn't even trying to get, I'm not even accessing the same chemicals, but it was just part of that culture.
It's a culture.
We used to break, how like when they fumigate houses and they put those tents over them, and in my neighborhood, that was just going on a lot. So we would just throw the bandanas over our faces and go in, I mean, we've had friends pass out and had to go back and get them, but that was a thing.
Wow.
And what's interesting is that like I talk about that almost 40 years later or 35 years later, I would never even consider that as an option. But at the time when you're surrounded by people who are just upping their game.
Talk about a frame.
It is.
Well, the frame shift when you're in that mental headspace. I mean, we were doing home invasions on other drug dealers, and it was the high risk situations. No, actually having some perverse satisfaction over, especially people who we didn't like. There was always this idea when I was engaged in, especially criminal activity against other criminals, that you're a part of the game, and if we fuck you, I'm going to get a perverse satisfaction out of it, and I'm going to laugh about it. And at that age, I 100% started getting off on, like, that's the development of a sociopath in my mind. I think you can create a sociopath. I know people think there's genetic markers, and I'm not even discrediting that. I for sure was going down the path where I was desensitized to violence.
Well, a personality disorder just means a maladaptive way of being that's counter to the culture. If you are exhibiting sociopathic behaviors and you're consistent, well, I mean, who's to say you're not a sociopath?
100%.
But I think that like I can compartmentalize my sociopathic behavior in the sense of like, I'm going to be transparent. Growing up as a male, you have this message of like scoring as many chicks as possible, right?
Right.
Well, sometimes you're in a relationship when that's going on, and you can, at least I could, totally numb that out, that I'm compromising the trust and connection that I have with this person because I'm seeking out this validation over here, and one has nothing to do with the other. Is the justification that I can create for myself, whether I'm drunk, sober, a young adult, whatever.
So it's fascinating to me that there's this culture that built on itself. Like no one ever thought, maybe we should just go and get real jobs or maybe go back to school and get our lives together. But like you're in a totally different hierarchy of accomplishment. It's like if you can rob the house, you've got your PhD in a way.
It's funny because so much narrative now is about like, being mindful of cultural appropriation and stuff like this. But there's no real talk about culture around substance abuse. And I think specifically, if I iron it down a little bit more, is substance abuse around young adults and teens.
Right.
It's a different dynamic. There's guys who you can see when you talk to them and, then they start tattooing their face and doing all this shit, but they're like, from Palo Alto, dude. You're not hardcore. And it's not about being hardcore, but there's a cultural element to what you're trying to represent.
And is prison, and you said getting 5 years is sort of a badge of honor, or is like that's your college in a way, just to go to
my college for me was getting like SFV. I'm from the San Fernando Valley. Like there was like this tattoo, it says like SFV across your stomach, and that just means you typically did something in prison, you put in work.
What does that mean?
You probably...
I'll say it. I mean, I feel like when you put in work, you're usually, stabbing somebody or creating some sort of scenario like that.
Yeah, smuggling drugs or you're doing something to earn
risky as hell.
Yeah, to earn your stripes within that collective group of people. But everyone who I grew up with that I looked up to had that. And the people who didn't have that were very close to them.
It's easier access to accomplishment. Like it's harder to feel a sense of accomplishment in the sort of the straight world where you have to work a job, go to school and do all these things. But in the criminal world, it's like, it's right there. There's a house across the street. Let's go break into it. Is that part of it?
I don't think so. I feel like we're not even exposed to what that looks like to have a real job in a normalcy, so I think that we're just surrounded by these guys that we perceive as like heroes in the community of the criminal element, and it's attractive, Ben. I mean, it really, I can remember being 5th and 6th grade and it being so attractive what the guys were doing in junior high and high school and putting in work at such a young age. And so that's the next steps I'm going to have to be involved in. And
was there ever a question that you were doing something wrong?
I mean, I think I always knew I was doing something wrong. 100%.
And what did that feel like to know that?
There were certain people I felt bad about 100%, but there were certain people I compartmentalized and go, we all signed up for this.
We all signed up for it.
Here, you know how I equate it? This will make sense to whenever I post this on TikTok or wherever it goes on your podcast. See, there's a social agreement we're all engaging in right now. And as soon as this goes off into the ether, people get to comment and put whatever shit that they want out there. You're a fucking narcissist, Chris. Ben, you're the worst therapist on planet. What kind of advice? The agreement is I put that out, I become subject to that. And the mentality when I was out on the streets it was an old school mob mentality in my mind. We don't fuck with cops, women, or children. Anyone else though who's involved in this transaction of certain goods or services, you opened yourself up to that. This is a product of the world that we live in. And at a young age, that was how I was groomed out to be. I had peers who were my age, but I wasn't listening to those dudes. That's actually who I was competing with to get closer to the 3 other guys who were my big homies. Ironically, as we're on this, I had a buddy. It's so crazy. Yesterday, I posted a picture of him. When he died it was May 23rd, 2004, of an opiate overdose. That dude, his name was Roic. His name was Michael. But everyone called him Roic. He's a badass graffiti writer. He was my older homie. He was like 3 years older than me. And this whole time I had grown up, I wanted to be a part of this crew. I had a crew of kids. We had a group. It was called FSU Fuck Shit Up. And then the crew above us was OK, Outcast, or other kids, because we were the other kids. We were the fuck ups. We weren't allowed to be at the sorority dances or whatever shit like that was. And they were going to finally put me down for the crew, which just means you're going to be in the crew tonight. And he pulled me into the back room and he goes, don't do it. He goes, these fools don't give a fuck. We're not the family it seems. You're wanting to emulate something, Chris, that's not really real. You need to get the fuck out of here. Which for a 21-year-old at that time to say to me, it trips me out a lot of times. He was much older psychologically and emotionally than majority of us was. He was like, you need to get the fuck out of here and go to treatment. And then he died like fucking 6 months later, dude. And I think that played a major role in terms of my own, like I couldn't have told you before, like I was a pawn in the game and I went down to shoot heroin because I was a cool part of the story. And I did that after him. He had just planted a seed and then I had to start facing shit as time went on.
Fascinating stuff. Wow.
I just find it fascinating going down memory lane and what I thought was so important at that time in my life and how compromised I could have been if, I continued down that path. I think that we've been super fortunate. What I'm hearing, at least with Chris, is you have these God shots of messages along the way. At least availed me this off ramp. I mean, I live at the end of this cul-de-sac in a predominantly like conservative neighborhood. I'm living that Mr. Rogers life in comparison. I'm wearing this dad sweater and
It covers up your tattoos.
A little bit, but I just
I don't even know if he has tattoos, but I know he has tattoos.
I'm not as covered as Chris, but I put in my work.
Chris, you're covered in tattoos?
I'm highly covered in tattoos.
Speaking of the tattoos, I mean, I haven't gotten any, in the last 20 years, but it was so important, during, that process and what I perceive is the development. And I'm just super grateful that I have a seat at the table that I'm at currently. And I know that. I'm really privileged to be in this position today.
Yeah. Where do you live?
I live in Flagstaff. and it's, a mountain town. It's 7,000 feet. I would never move back to the city.
I saw a video of a guy who was from a mountain town there. He comes outside and there's all these fucking bald eagles on his lawn.
They just chill there.
They're just chilling. There's like 20 of them.
Such a dope morning to wake up.
Can you imagine?
Yeah, I mean, I've got deer in the green belt behind me, and sometimes there's bobcats and stuff in the summers.
And you got hardcore tattoos, dog.
Oh, dude.
What's your hardest tattoo?
No, it's not. I don't want to talk about tattoos.
It's a joke. It's a joke. The funny thing about all my tattoos, I didn't get majority of my tattoos until I had substantial time sober.
Really?
The whole theme of actually all my tattoos is a gypsy. It's like I have a massive gypsy back piece. There's all this other symbolism, but so much of it is intertwined to what my existence has been. The idea of gypsies is like we find home wherever home is, and we build culture wherever we need to do, and they survive one way or another.
Have you been a wanderer your whole life?
I think we all wander in one way or another, not to sound like some hokey like
true.
Spiritual weird thing, but I think we're all kind of...
You can be a hokey spiritual weird thing. I don't mind.
It's one of those things back tied into luxury-based treatment where when it gets too hokey and spiritual, I'm like, what snake oil are you selling me?
Yeah, why am I petting this horse? You should do a TikTok of your tattoos.
I've thought about it. I see people make videos and like, let me tell you a story about my tattoos, and I'm like, I can't be that guy. And also I feel like maybe it's something I need to keep sacred to myself. Like I go to the gym. I go to LA Fitness because they have a really good sauna. I'm big on sauna and cold exposure. I
saw your ice bath video.
Yeah, it's great. We got out the sober living.
You looked ridiculous in it.
Yeah, I know. But you saw my tattoos.
I didn't see your tattoos. I just like, why is this fucker in an ice bath? He's one of those ice bath people.
It's so great. It's so fucking great. I will take that one all day. It fucking feels amazing.
So, Roy, do you do ice baths?
I do, yeah.
Really? You too? Et tu, Brute? Jesus Christ, what's going on?
You need it.
I don't want ice bath.
What I set up,
I feel like you need it. I feel like you need it.
He feels the vibe.
I feel like you need it.
What do you think it would do for me?
Yeah, well, I know scientifically. Your boy, Andrew Huberman, he's like down the street here.
Oh, yeah?
You know who that is, right? He's a
neuroscientist. He lives here?
Yeah, he's from Stanford.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's that street. Yeah, I was thinking like you're pointing to like downtown.
It's the same thing to me. I'm from LA, dude. It's like all Stanford. You could be like San Jose. I'd be like, it's all San Francisco.
You're so full of shit. Go on.
But it's cold enough that I set up a trough near my hot tub. It's a horse trough, essentially. Nothing fancy. Cold enough, but it's cold enough at night that I can, it's still icy and it's easy to
And what
drain.
does it do for you?
From my experience and what I've heard more and what I feel is like it resets the body. It's like such a shock that it resets. But then like Stefan actually turned me on to that Wim Hof breathing stuff, and it helped with me staying.
So does it basically calm you down?
No. So what it does is it increases dopamine around 240% and norepinephrine, which is adrenaline, around 520 or 540%.
I believe that.
So focus, but the dopamine spikes last significantly throughout the day afterwards. So I geeked out on the science because I follow Huberman, your boy. He's in everything.
How do you know he's in my boy? How do you know he's my boy?
It's a joke.
Because I do listen, but I listen to him.
We do that. Like, hey, I saw your boy last night, or I saw, and it's like usually kind of a side jab of sorts. It is your boy because you know him.
Because you're from the Bay.
You're from the Bay.
Yeah, for those of you listening at home, the Uberman Lab is a podcast that I listen to religiously to, and I have no idea how these two guys know that I do, and it offends me that they have crawled inside my head.
But the Bay to me is, like I said, it's not even really the Bay. It's like from here to Willits.
Willits?
Yeah.
Are you high? You're high. Are you sure you're in recovery?
It's I don't know where Willits is.
Willits is
it's a bad place with bad things. Okay. We don't. The things I exclude from the Bay are Willits, Sacramento, and Marin County.
Wow, the Marin one. Wow, that's a bold statement.
Marin, I'm racist against Marin. Okay. It's just an awful, terrible place. It's beautiful. And when the revolution comes and I'm emperor, I'm going to force everyone to leave Marin, and I'm going to declare it a national park. You can have the Grand Canyon. You have to have like a ticket to like
so crazy
like go down the river and stuff. Sure. You have to wait for like 10
permits.
Years. That's what Marin County is going to be. You're going to have to get a ticket to go check it out because it's so beautiful.
But all the elites want it that way.
No, they're not going to be allowed to live there. No one will live there. Deer will live there. Deer, skunks, and raccoons will live in Marin County, and that's it.
It's so interesting you're saying this because it's reminding me of this. I had this conversation with a client's parent the other day, and he's like, I felt like what you said was really judgmental. And I was like, I doubled down. I was like, you're right. What I said was judgmental. My job that I get paid for is to be judgmental.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we live in a world where people think judgment is always a negative association. No matter what, we're designed to make judgments on people. I think probably I'm segueing a little bit in because I wanted to talk about this one thing. Is like one thing I think that's playing into like a lot of the issues centered around recovery, mental health, is like how politically correct things need to be and in a buttoned up manner.
Yeah.
I feel like it's making treatment space stale and stagnant. Yeah. And the reality is despite what may be happening out in the ether, the world people are going into is it's treacherous.
Well, you have to call things out. You can't separate judgment and perception. If you call a thing out, you're seeing it. And if you're seeing it, you're judging it. And if you're judging it, you're seeing it. So fuck it. Just say it. And if you're wrong, the key around judgment is to be flexible about changing your perception of like maybe you judged it, maybe you were wrong. Okay, so I got that wrong. All right, well let's work on that. But I'm gonna call stuff out. Roy, how do you get parents to get their loved ones into treatment?
Once again, I'm piggybacking on what we've just talked about as far as this direct conversation we need to have with those families, because most of the families that are coming to a program like mine have been successful in their own lives in some sort of capacity, but have failed in this situation, as far as the addiction and their loved one. And so it is interesting that all of a sudden I'm talking to these CEOs of big corporations in a capacity that they're probably not accustomed to, but I have to be as honest and transparent about their situation and give them that information. And if they continue to pursue, an application and follow up and pursue us, then I obviously did a good thing.
But what sort of tactics do you use in the moment when you have somebody who's thinking about putting somebody into treatment and they're kind of hesitating?
I don't have a tactic in the sense of, I feel confident in just bridging what we are. And this is what we have to offer. It sounds like you could benefit from something like this.
You're way nicer than me.
I am. You know what? Because I don't want to be so car salesy or convince them as much as I want to just offer them some information. And I know that's a little bit softer, but in the admissions process, for me, I don't want to start off in a negative tone.
I think where I come from is that I hold all the people that I've seen die in the moment. And I'm like, part of it's my shit, because I get a little bit angry at people who get delicate and I don't want to hurt this person's feelings. It's like, hurt their feelings.
But Ben, that's evolved for me. When I was coming, let's say 15 years ago, with a tone of you're loving your son to death and you're a fucking dumbass, and I need to just massage that message. It's the same message, but it's just delivered a little gentle.
Well, maybe I have something to learn from you.
And, I've not told that a lot, but
anyhow. Do you go into a first session with a family like that?
I can.
You can.
If I think there's something.
There's an intuition piece that.
Well, I don't just do that. I mean, I have to gauge the. I have to read the room.
That's what I'm saying. So it's not. So it can be misinterpreted, even like because through audio or even us having this conversation. It's like, well, you're not just rolling in. Family sits down and you're like, hey, you're fucking good. You know what I mean? Well, there's a build up and an intuition that you have based on each individual experience, and you go, this parent's.
Well, let's just say there's a parent who is sort of hemming and hawing about the cost of treatment. And I say, what are I'll grab my phone. What are the prices of coffins? Like, let me just look this up real quick.
Oh, man.
Like, are
you want to do any side work?
That's old school shit.
But I'll do that. But I don't always do that. I mean, that's just,
sure.
That depends. Or I'll say, hey, listen, can I be really frank with you? I'll say, look, I want you to understand this is my position. I'll usually ask permission. I'm like, hey, can I speak to you in this really, really basic way about what I see here? Because this is what I'm seeing. I only speak to people in a really harsh way when I really know that I've got buy-in and that I know they can take it. Because I don't see a lot of people get they're using that opportunity to be pretty sadistic. And that's not what I'm doing. What I'm doing is what I make it really clear to the parent or to the friend or whomever it is that this is coming from a place of love. And I'll say that. I'll say, look, this is coming from a place of love. I'm trying to preserve life. Can I tell you what I think needs to be done to preserve this person's life?
Which I think is better hearing you articulate that the way you articulated it better than the first bit when you said it. Because it also demonstrates one of the issues I have with a lot of people, because you see my TikTok. There's one video where I'm like, bro, you act like a fucking tyrant. also what people don't understand is there's a lot of love and compassion tied into this whole circumstance. It's not just the 30-second bit you got to watch of me having this uncomfortable transaction with this guy. There's so much nuance and time invested into that relationship.
I think the other piece is that if I get someone who's like a salt of the earth person, who's more like, blue collar, I don't talk to them like that because they've had enough of that shit. It's the white glove thing. It's the we don't want to get anybody's hands dirty thing. And I'm like, I'll tell you a story. So my shrink told me this story about this woman. Her mother-in-law was this really stuck-up, kind of arrogant, wealthy. She was coming to visit, and she was having all this anxiety, being judged, and this woman coming into her home and stuff. And so the day finally arrives, and she's there, and she's kind of, her mother-in-law is kind of looking around with, narrow, slitty eyes, and kind of like, and then the dog, they were out in the country, and this dog, their golden retriever, been out in the fields rolling around in all the cow shit, and the dog runs up the porch and bashes through the screen door and jumps up on the mother-in-law and gets all the shit all over her. But there's love in that. You know what I'm saying? It's like, so what I try to do is I try to bring people into the shit a little bit, I suppose, because their son or daughter, whoever it is in the shit, and they don't really realize it. They don't realize how greedy that stuff is, and if they're going to help them, they're going to have to get down there and get shit under their fingernails, right, Roy? Is that?
Yeah, and I just want to clarify too is that a lot of that is self-preservation of my own energy too.
Yeah.
So if I've got this new client, I don't even know if they're qualified. I don't know the background. So before I invest that intensity, because we're good at what we do, I can clearly tell that any of us in this room can communicate really well with this circumstance. Yeah. But it takes a lot of energy out of me to be on. Yeah. To be on. So it's like, I don't know if this person's going to come to my program anyways.
That's true. And I don't actually do this as much as I used to. And like only half of my clientele are in recovery. And so I don't have to be, you both were on the front lines. And I was much younger when I was on the front lines, and I'm not as like, it is taxing.
Sure.
That is true. So I have the luxury of saying,
but my staff does pull me in. There is this kind of thing that goes on, and we need to pull Roy in on this family or this situation because they know I'm going to come in with that intensity.
Well, I'll send some people to you if I can't figure it out. You're the good cop, I guess.
No, I'm the bad cop.
Oh, you are the bad cop.
At work.
What I was trying to say is that my staff will pull me in when we need to bring that kind of heat.
Oh,
but I'm not doing it on the front end with the admissions process. All right. So yes, I will have that conversation. Those direct, like, you are killing your kid. He's been here 6 years, and you're sending him all this,
so
fluff.
Let's we got some time left, maybe 10 minutes. What do you guys think makes somebody get into treatment? Like, is there a golden formula or not?
No, there's no golden formula.
There's no golden formula.
There's no golden formula.
There's circumstance.
What I will say is that the bottom shit is nonsense. I don't believe in you need to be at bottom to hit treatment. I think real quality treatment providers can create a bottom within treatment.
Oh, interesting.
Through motivational interviewing, like insight based.
Yeah, that's true. Like I don't like bottom is, what is it when you're dead? I mean, that's a bottom, right?
That's the ultimate bottom. It don't get lower than that.
I consider myself a higher bottom in the sense of like I probably had a lot more room for more compromised whatever, but I think that I was just done, and I'm grateful that I didn't have to wake up in incarcerated for decades before it worked for me. That is definitely a door that was open and available. I mean that sincerely. Like, I don't try to promote my story any more than it is. It just is. Yeah. It was enough for me.
How much of yourselves of your personal story do you share with the people that you try to get into treatment? And
I share in a general way with mom and dad. When it's time for him to maybe interview, I hook him up with a staff that's probably closer in their age and can speak their language a little better. I don't have a background in opiates and a lot of the drugs that are being used these days. So I do believe that I'm perceived as the old guy who, what does he know kind of stuff.
How about you, Chris?
I self-disclose pretty openly. Also, it's hard for me to even justify not self-disclosing when every aspect of my life feels like it's on the internet or something.
I get a lot of pushback from people who tell me, well, you're not an alcoholic, you're not a drug addict, what do you know? And I guess my thing is, do you need to have had cancer to be an oncologist? What is your take on that? Like, do you think that someone needs to have a background in
No,
that?
right off the rip, I was thinking about 3 therapists we work with regularly who we make the referral out to. They're in the basket all the time because they get it. One of them, she for sure has got some exercise stuff that's for sure on the borderline of addiction. But relationally, they're the wizards.
This is also for both of you. How does doing this work in recovery help your recovery or help yours feed you?
I think it's two separate things.
Okay, same one.
For me, I feel like I have to fill my cup up outside of my work. If I'm getting paid to talk to these guys or to create this program, I don't believe that's part of my recovery. I think that there's maybe glimpses of like, oh, I just witnessed something I don't want in my own personal life, but I have to definitely fill my cup outside of work. And that's always been the case, and I believe in that for myself.
Chris?
It's a piggyback. I think I'm going to say I actually don't think it's helpful. I think working in this, especially in 12-step world, at the end of the day, I don't want to really go to a meeting. I want to go to a meeting less than I wanted to go to a meeting before when I didn't want to go to the meeting. So now it's like double less. I don't want to hear anything else about recovery at the end of the day because I've already been talking to everyone who's struggling with mental health, substance abuse. Even if I'm not dealing with a demographic that's primary substance abuse, at the end of the day, I don't want to feel like I'm being of service, if I'm really honest. And then here's the life lesson. When I suit up and show up and do the thing I don't want to do, I often end up having these experiences when I go there that I'm like, I'm glad I showed up. At the end of the day, there is a narrative for sure within myself that I do not want to do this.
I just wanted to mention is that I can't rely on my own intellect to sustain this work. And so that's why I keep bringing up, I got to fill my cup outside so that I can bring something to my profession.
Certainly. Last question. What would you say your message for the world was? If you had a message to deliver to the world, and that might be impossible because you might have several messages, but if you could pick one strong one, what would you want everyone to know that you know?
I can go first on this one. I think about it quite frankly because I'm constantly thinking about how to elevate the youth, because I think the youth is where it starts. I think a message I would want to articulate out to people is no one, at the end of the day, we're all selfish as fuck. And with us being selfish as fuck, it's not an alcoholic thing either. It's not a substance abuse. It's not a mental health thing. It's an evolutionary thing. We're designed to be selfish because survival's fucking hard. If you can understand that, some of the interpersonal conflicts, some of the shit you have to deal with other human beings doesn't feel so bad. You can view people in a more generous way rather than the world's out to get me. I got dealt this shitty hand. I'm fucked. People are fucking shitty. Da-da-da. All that shit's true. It's not true. There's a lot of beauty also in the fact that people, despite other human beings being shitty, suit up and show up for you despite all the other shit that they have going in life, because them being of service for you in those moments actually helps them remember maybe humanity or their own utility, their ability to be of help to another person. And if you can figure out how to encapsulate that into your own life, you might make better some of your own personal suffering. I am a firm believer, and it's not grounded in like hokey 12-step or anything like that. Service is your way to freedom. It's an opportunity when we're stuck in the worst situations I've been in my life. I've figured out ways to get up when I do not want to get up. I don't want to do shit for anyone else. All I want to do is lay in bed and think about how rough my life is and how fucked up this situation played out. Being of service is huge, and is a huge catalyst for change, and there's multiple ways for you to do that.
To sort of embrace the selfish aspect of doing service and to know that it helps you to help others. That's cool. Roy?
At least currently, at this stage of my life, is that the contempt prior to investigation. I'm here in California visiting for this week. There's obviously a lot of homelessness going on. I think growing up, I just didn't have the information of how people may have gotten to that place. I remember my mom, she was picking me up from school, and this is in Santa Monica in the early 80s. There seemed to be just a lot more homeless in Santa Monica at the time, and it's its own city. So I think that there was a lot of concessions to welcome that at the time. And so she had shared with me that some of these guys might have been war veterans, and there's the mental health component. And I'm trying to digest this as an 8-year-old. And so that was my first awareness of like, hey, I don't know what might be going on with that person or what their background might be what perception of like they're just freeloading off the system, or they're all just shitting on the sidewalks. And it's like, who would want to live like that anyways? Right? So it's not like it's a big FU to us in society. It's us in society that's kind of compartmentalized them, and now it's an eyesore for us. For example, I don't know what the solution is. And so I think that's just an example of like, I don't know what's going on with that individual, other than it might be a little discomfort for me.
Yeah, when I walk to jiu-jitsu, I go straight through basically I'd say the outskirts of the TL, the Tenderloin. It's our Pill Hill. I go right by 8th and the gym is on 8th and Howard. It's pretty rough. And I really actually do walk through that and remind myself that I'm not different than any of those guys on the street. That they took a different path, that even though that's a very unhealthy path, that it's still a path, and that they were circumstances, mental health issues, whatever it is, drugs, who knows, that's where they are and we are equal. And that having contempt for that kind of stuff is, I think, really toxic.
Yeah.
I think it hurts people.
Sure.
When they look at people like that and go, oh, that person is down there. I think it actually does damage to the brain, honestly.
I think your daily meditation exercise might be the healing of that, though. Like actually having to walk through that and think about the reality of like.
I think I get more out of that than I do out of the jiu-jitsu these days, honestly. Like,
yeah.
I mean, I'll never forget, I saw a guy, I'm pretty sure the ambulance was pulling up and he probably OD'd, and he was lying on the ground and on the cement, and they're surrounded by trash and the needles, and they were just holding his head and petting his forehead.
Wow.
And it's like it was such a reminder, like
humanity.
That's a human fucking being.
Yeah.
Like I remember I was walking this time, and the paramedics, there was a guy, I'm pretty sure he was dead, who died in his tent, and they were dragging him by the ankle down the street like he was a sack of fucking potatoes. Like that was the end of his life.
Sure.
That was the last thing that happened to him, was that he got dragged down the street by somebody who was just like, oh, we gotta.
I want to just say, full disclosure, I felt that way working in the industry, where I've just gotten so like jaded and, like true. This guy can't get it or whatever. The parents can't get it, and I get to that place. And so that was a red flag for me at a certain point in my profession too.
Well, listen, guys, I think this has been a good talk. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for being so open and coming all this way, and
we'll be back up here in another quarter.
They brought me a sandwich. I had a sandwich for lunch, and it was fantastic. It was the best sandwich ever.
Paris Bakery, Monterey.
All right, guys, listen, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ben.
Thank you for listening. If you have any questions or wish to be a guest on my show, you can contact me at benjaminrussick@gmail.com. And if you want all the contact information and details on the fabulous Roy and Chris, please head to my program notes. Thanks again, and tune in next time.